Hey guys,
Afternoon.
Afternoon, folks.
We'll give it a couple minutes. I'm still missing a couple people. Give it one more minute. Looks like Laura's coming in now. I know Mariana's out this week, but I think I hadn't heard from Steve Zaretti, so we'll give him one more minute, and then if he comes late, that's okay. Hi, Laura.
Hi, how goes, guys?
Good.
It's finally a beautiful day outside.
That is nice, although I sadly have to go to a wake today, so that's gonna be sad. Sad on a beautiful day. But I just
Oh,
Okay, I just got a huge deadline out today, so I finally have a half of a brain cell to offer, but not that that means I'm prepared. It just means that I can focus.
I'll take it.
Although it has been a dickens of a week. I had a relative who accidentally shot himself, but he survived, out of surgery now, and friends who unfortunately lost their daughter this weekend. That's the wake I'm going to, but yeah.
Oh, that's awful. I'm sorry to hear that.
Yeah, so it's been a crazy week.
my condolences, Laura.
Yeah, not a good week. But I got this deadline out, and now again, literally, I mean, like 5 minutes ago, everything's now out.
I'm so sorry to hear that, Laura, but if it makes you feel any better, I also have a half a brain cell after this
No
week's
bet.
legislative session. So we'll make a whole one together.
Aren't you
We can
still in
share it.
the legislative session right now? I mean, are you over at Hartford right now?
Yeah, I'm sitting at the LOB.
Yeah, that's what I figure. Yeah, no, it's been crazy, but luckily the gunshot wound, it does show you're more often likely to get shot with your own gun, cleaning his gun, shoots himself in the knee. Not a good
Who
place to
was
shoot yourself.
who is this?
My relative, my
Oh,
brother. So smooth
for a
move.
second there, I thought you meant Tim.
No, thank goodness. No, he does not clean guns. We have some that we inherited from my father, but they're locked up and we don't use them. But yeah, it really does show you this. It can be so dangerous. This guy is actually very good normally with gun safety. I guess it only takes one time to make a stupid mistake.
Yeah, that's crazy. That sounds like you're welcoming the end of the week, but we'll try
Yeah,
we'll try
I
to get through today pretty straightforward.
yeah. Well, kind of, except that again, the wake's today, and then I think the funeral's on Sunday. So yeah, it is.
So I did text Steve's already. Haven't heard back yet from Steve. So I figured, we'll just get started in the interest of time here. But I'll just kick it off. Just a quick note, I will say. Oh, it looks like CTN is joining us. Okay. Just a quick note, I will say that next Friday, if somebody can steer the meeting, I am actually going to be traveling by train from DC, and anybody who has ever traveled Amtrak before knows that the service is spotty, and that's being kind about it. So no need for a volunteer now, but I may ask one or two of you to kind of steer the meeting next week to get through, since I'll probably not be able to contribute much beyond just listening in and hopefully not losing my connection every 5 seconds. So with that, is there any public comment just to start it off?
No, but I forgot we had the public listening to us, so I apologize for the personal information up front. We can strike that from the record.
No worries.
Len, I'll just say, I'm also traveling, probably from the same place as you on Friday, so I'm a big maybe, and won't be able to volunteer, at least to steer.
Well, if you're on the train, let me know. We can have a drink.
I'm up for a drink, but I'm gonna be flying.
Okay.
I will, I'll volunteer to steer next Friday, Len.
Thank you,
That
Doug.
helps.
Appreciate it.
Okay. Then you'll take care of the agenda and
Yeah.
paperwork stuff?
Yeah, I'll
Okay.
take care of stuff. Yeah.
All right. Sure.
All right. Well, jumping right to it then. Let's jump into item number 4 on the agenda. Discussion of the environmental subcommittee report sections.
Just wait to get organized first. Again, because I'm not that organized. Is the agenda in chat or is it in an email? And are our documents?
It's posted, but I'll share
Oh,
my
nothing.
screen right now and show you what I have on my screen.
And when you say it's posted, what do you mean? Where is it posted? Sorry.
Typically, well, the agendas are always posted on the Connecticut General Assembly's website. So, which I forget, I'm so used to looking at over my years of doing it there. Sometimes it can be tough to navigate, but it's always posted on the committee, the Energy Committee. I believe it's under other meetings, and the agendas are always posted there. If you go to the Connecticut General Assembly, cga.ct.gov.
Yep, and I'm in it. Energy and technology, and then
And then you go to other meetings, I think under the agendas, it should be listed under March 8th.
other events or other meetings. I don't
Could be
see
other events. I can't remember off the top of my head what it's specifically called.
other events. Let's look. Agendas. Okay, and then it should say March. Okay, yep. Let's see.
Yeah.
Yes, thank you. Sorry, I'm not familiar with navigating this website. And are all of our documents on this website too?
No, so all of the draft documents that we've been using the SharePoint through, that's more just like a
Are on
working
SharePoint.
type of situation. I believe when this is all said and done, and Abigail, keep me honest, when we finally get a report out and whatnot, that will be available on the CGA website. In addition to all of our transcripts, I believe, as well, or perhaps they're stored somewhere else. But essentially, anything associated with this will be available through the Energy and Technology Committee page. So, what I had on the agenda for this week literally was to try to go through some of these subcommittee report sections. I know we have some drafts out there. We've all been kind of working on it in the SharePoint, which has been helpful. But I wanted to specifically go through, particularly the environmental to start off with, because we haven't spent much time on that yet. I know that Alicia, Laura, and I believe Eric have all been working on that. So I was going to bring that up, and we can kind of start off from that. I can figure out how to shift my. Just bear with me for a moment. There we go. Okay. Are you seeing this now?
Yes.
Yes. Okay. Thank you. So I know Laura and Alicia and Eric, the three of you have worked on this, I think for several weeks now. I'm happy to walk through it, but also happy to have you kind of steer the conversation, if you will, just to kind of get your thoughts out there and just generally speaking, address some of the questions and some of the issues that we have, and particularly in the comments, which I think there are a number of them. So just to start off with it, I'll kick this off with this one particular issue right here, right under the first paragraph. John had raised a question with regard to water quantities, and I know Laura, you have some responses here. I don't know if you want to address it now and see if we're good to go with this language. I think you're on mute.
Sorry, I was coughing, so I turned the mute on. Yeah, John had mentioned that it's non-consumptive, but I mean it's not always non-consumptive. It depends on what part of the river you're looking at. You know, if there is a bypassed reach of the river, you know, prior to getting to a turbine, that area of the river has less flow. And obviously it changes flows depending on the operation. So even if the full amount in the long run comes through, you know, it can change flows instantaneously. And as we know, either with peaking or even something that says it's peaking and it says it's run of the river and it's peaking on a 24-hour basis. That's what we're talking about when we talk about changing quantity. So it does have an effect on quantity flow that way.
And I will voice I am familiar with what you're referring to, particularly past flows and that sort of thing. We have a facility in Massachusetts that has that exact issue. So I'm okay with the language, but John, I want to look to you just quickly to see if you're comfortable with the way it's been answered.
Yeah, it's helpful to clarify what you were getting at. I guess I immediately went to the just consumptive use and
Yes.
not like the more localized kind of bypass flow, you know, changes in hydrograph in those discrete sections. So I understand what you're saying now. That's helpful.
Yeah.
And I'm fine with that. That makes sense to me.
Okay.
Thanks.
Excellent. I'm actually just going to remove that comment then just to kind of clean it up as we're going.
Just go down.
And
then John added independent there.
Yep.
And I wasn't quite sure why you needed to add independent there, but what was your reasoning? As opposed to non-independent nonprofit organizations? I didn't know what that was.
Yeah, I think it's just to clarify that that's how the Low Impact Hydropower Institute, you know, refers to itself as independent of, you know, industry or even NGO affiliations. It's its own kind of independent organization that looks at the criteria from a, you know, an unbiased from scientific kind of basis. So that was the intent of just clarifying that. And part of it is just because that's how they talk about themselves. I don't think it's critical either way.
I see what you're saying. I see what you're saying now. Sorry. I also was thinking, what do you, I like all nonprofits are independent, but now I see what you're saying. You were trying to define that it was non-industry. That was that's fine.
And it's not NGO either, even though a lot of NGOs sit on the board and, you know.
Is it nonprofit though?
I believe it is.
Or is it a profit organization? NGO is non-governmental. Is it a governmental organization?
No.
So it is an NGO, but you're not sure it's a nonprofit.
Let's go to the Google copter and figure it out.
We have a hand up from someone who works at Leahy.
Yeah, great, perfect. She can answer.
Perfect.
Sorry, I am a member of the public, so I wasn't sure if I could jump in and clarify. But
Sure.
John, to your point, we are a 501c3 nonprofit. So yes, we are nonprofit, and we independently certify. So John is right. We are unbiased, not linked to anybody, and we conduct our own independent certifications that are science-based. I hope that clarification is helpful, and I'll go off mute.
No, you can stay on for a second. So are you fine with that how it's referred to there?
I would move the independent to say there are national nonprofit organizations which independently certify.
Yes, okay.
I also wanted to clarify that currently in the US, Leahy is the only organization that offers a science-based low impact certification.
I know.
So for the group, should we, are we dropping independent or are we
No,
maintaining?
we're
it?
moving it. We're taking it. So we're changing independent to national. And then we're putting independently. Yep, right there. So there are national nonprofit organizations like Leahy. Yep, perfect.
I'm good with that. Whoever AT is on here editing, I'm good with that. Oh, Eric. Okay, that works. Thank you. It's backwards. I'm looking at it. HE. I'm like, we don't have anybody with a letter H name.
That's, he goes by those pronouns. So he puts that in his little circle.
So moving on down here, it looks like, I mean, most of this looks like nobody had any real specific comments on or questions here. And I know Mariana's not here today, but she did have some question, some issue with this sentence that's highlighted in purple that she found confusing. I did have a comment on it as well with regard to kind of addressing non-powered dams, as it's not really within our purview, but interested in others' thoughts on this as well.
I thought it was a little confusing too when I read it and then read her comment. So I didn't have any suggestions right off the top. So I just left that in there as a comment and I didn't comment on it myself because I understood why she thought it was confusing. I think you commented after I had looked on things. So I didn't see your comments, Len.
It could be, yeah, I did that this morning.
But I don't know if Eric or Alicia have any suggestions on how to clarify this a little bit more.
Well, I feel like elsewhere in the report, we might refer to either, 4,000 or 5,000 dams as part of just the context setting for the fact that, yes, we have a lot of dams in Connecticut. And I think if, as long as we're being clear, so I guess in that sentence that was highlighted where it says, a vast majority of these dams, we should probably say, vast majority of, the 5,000 dams or these 5,000 dams. So we know that we're talking about the same subsets of dams or the large number. I understand your point, Len, that's not really the focus of this report too. But I think it doesn't hurt to have that kind of context. And part of what's being talked about in this chapter too is, hey, there are a lot of issues associated with dams, not just those, that, have the potential for producing hydropower. And I think it's helpful context, even though it, it's slightly out of our, the main thrust of the report.
Eric, that's not the part I found confusing. I found that I think it's obvious that the these is referring to the 5,000 in the sentence before. It's the second part of the sentence that says, and other issues associated with these dams at the same time that efforts to reduce the environmental impacts of hydropower facilities are considered. That's the part of the sentence that I thought needed clarification.
I think that might have been just a
typo,
accepting changes issue that we didn't catch. You're right, it doesn't make sense.
Yeah, so it's that second part of the sentence, but I don't know what we were trying to say there.
I'll have to think about it for a minute.
I didn't, yeah.
But what I will say is, if we do decide, and I know we've gone back and forth about this a few times, that if we are going to talk about potential projects on currently unpowered dams, I feel like we do need to address the condition of our dams in general.
Were you trying to convey or just provide the context? Like, there are a lot of dams, there's management required, whether they're hydropowered or not. And in the context of this particular section, we're talking about having limited resources to actually do that management. Is that what you're getting at? Okay, that's kind of what I thought. And that makes complete sense to me. We probably could word it a little better, but I think that point is totally valid.
Yeah, and I'm happy to take any suggestions on the wording. I think at least I'm at a point now where I can look at it a million more times. Probably not come bright ideas, you know, when you've been looking at a document for so long.
One suggestion I would maybe say, I think we want to I think the important thing is that its resources will be required to address the safety environmental impact of these dams. But the next sentence, the 2023 report by the ASDSO estimates the cost of rehabilitation to blah, blah, blah. Maybe we could say rehabilitation, comma, required to address safety concerns and environmental impacts, and then have the rest of that sentence, and then take out that whole sentence we are highlighting in purple right there.
I mean, I think this is one that we might wordsmith offline.
Okay, that's fine. That's fine.
I think we get the point.
As long as we note that
we want to clarify this, and
yeah.
Obviously we'll have another opportunity for folks to take a look at, after some wordsmithing, if to make additional changes if needed.
Yeah,
I'm just going to
perfect.
put a note here, keep the comments, just so we know we need to address that issue there offline.
Yep. Yep.
So moving down, it looks like there are some questions with regard to just checking the values on this. I'm not sure if we can do this here, but I know that there were some other questions elsewhere. Duncan, go ahead.
Consistent about our numbers, kind of almost a moving target, but the latest numbers that we've got together for the number of operating hydros in Connecticut, the number stands now at 25, and the megawatts is 152, and that's what we're talking about in another section, the existing and challenge and benefit section. So I'm wondering if we could just change the 27 to a 25 and change 158 to a 152. And John has a list that shows all of those sites that are operating in Connecticut.
Is this what's referenced in the other subcommittee report? I believe. Yeah. So this is actually specifically referenced there. John, I don't know if you can mention where you pulled that number from. I don't remember off the top of my head what the citation was.
It is a combination of the FERC license and exemption database, in addition to what we know about the non-jurisdictional projects in the state, which aren't obviously in the FERC.
Does it make sense for us to just to double check this against the CELT report, the ISO CELT report?
And we should mention that we want to include a citation. So consistency, we want to make sure there's consistency throughout the documents, but also on each document where it's mentioned, we should actually include a citation down below so that we know what we're referring to.
Len, would the CELT document include all of the hydros or just those that participate directly in the market?
I thought it included all of them, frankly. I could have sworn. I know I've seen, we have two that are kind of questionable, but maybe you're right. I'm struggling here to come up with a better citation, but
what if we say estimated and just give ourselves a little leeway?
That's the way to go.
all right.
Right. I mean, some of this is just from what we know is out there. Like you take Andy Pecklow's project in Pomperog. He's not running, but he's licensed and he's trying to get towards putting it online. So that's an example of information you won't be able to find anywhere, but I happen to just know that. So yeah, putting in an estimated 25 and then 152 megawatts would be good for our purposes, I think.
Okay.
Yeah, and we'll have to obviously change that percentage to from 86% to whatever it would now be. But yeah, we'll just have to make sure that we're consistent. And this is a good thing when we come back at the very end of looking at the chapters next to each other, we have to just make sure to catch these types of things. Yep. But a good catch.
Okay. And Alicia, you did add a comment, looks like earlier today. Does this change reflect or at least address the concerns you had here? She may not be able to.
Yeah.
No,
she-
I think that what, I thought that was referring to a comment made further down.
Oh, I'm sorry. I'm looking at yeah. I'm getting ahead of ourselves here. Looks like you're talking about down here potential.
Right there, yeah. And
Okay, I'm
so I think that we need to know what's going to be put out there as numbers for potential, and if there are numbers, because if we're not going to talk about potential generation, I may not. I don't know, Laura. We haven't discussed it together, or Eric, about whether this might even be necessary. My concerns is that we really don't have really good data on potential generation, and I don't want to put any numbers out there.
Yeah, and I wrote actually something similar in my response to John in the next note down. The same thing, that I don't feel we have credible information on the potential.
Would it make sense to point out the fact that we don't have good information, but there may be some potential, we just don't, there is no credible information that we can reference, and just point out the fact that there's a lack of info there?
I don't know. I don't know enough about it. I know that every time I come across the tiniest little dinky dam, everyone seems to think it has hydro potential, and I know that's not the case. So I know there are a lot of people who think things have hydro potential that don't. I know that a lot of our good hydro potential is being used right now, and I just don't know about what the potential is on those other dams, on other dams that are out there.
So
I
it's,
agree. The one thing I would say is that I'm pretty sure the National Renewable Energy Laboratory did an inventory of all the states and looked at, hydropower potential. I don't know how reliable it is, but it's, done by a national lab. But to your point, Laura, I don't think there's a lot left for development within Connecticut.
Yeah, I mean, I've been out to a few sites where I thought maybe it has some potential for hydro, that someone wasn't bringing it up. But most of the time when I hear people say they're bringing it up, it's on ridiculous sites. It's like a 5-foot high stone sieve. And I'm like, really? No, don't think so.
yeah, I mean, that's a lot of times it's the micro hydro stuff and everything else that just is not, I don't think, what we're trying to talk about here. I mean, when I think of potential for additional hydropower, I think of upgrades at existing
Me
facilities.
too. Me too. That's exactly what I think of, Len. That's where I think of most of our potential as being.
Mhm.
Or upgrades or significant dams like Colebrook or something like that, aren't going to be going anywhere and that have other uses.
Yeah. Duncan,
And I
you
had asked DEP the general question of because there were some state dams on the potential list, if the state was up for allowing hydro on theirs, and their answer was they've gotten a lot of inquiries, and every time potential generators have looked at their dam stock, essentially sort of run away and said no thank you.
Yeah, I too, like Alicia, went through the list of dams that were as potential. I couldn't even find them. I mean, they weren't using the dam safety names. They weren't using names I was familiar with. They weren't using names DEP Fisheries was familiar with. So I couldn't tell what happened. I mean, sometimes it was just saying the town's name. So, and obviously each town has a whole lot of dams. So I also couldn't kind of verify any level of accuracy on that list.
go ahead, Duncan.
Right, so as far as undeveloped, unpowered dams are concerned, it's anybody's guess as to how many are really out there that are feasible. I mean, we can't go doing a feasibility study on every one of them. But in my paper, what I have is 27 undeveloped, unpowered dams, or 27 undeveloped dams in Connecticut that could be 47 megawatts. Well, who says that? I mean, I got mine from Connecticut Hydropower Resource Assessment by Idaho National Lab Program, and the year is 2005. But you know, if you ask somebody like me or John, or that's experienced in hydro, we're going to say that I don't think there's any feasible sites that are going to be developed out there. I mean, you know, Collinsville squeak by, Collinsville Lower, forget it. There's just a handful that could be thought about, but you know, I don't really think there's too much out there as far as new projects going online, even if the rates get better. Anyway, you know, we cannot do a feasibility study on all of them. We cannot determine which ones are feasible or not. We can give a list like I did that somebody else says that they think they're feasible, but I don't think it's accurate. Alicia helped to improve on that list a little bit with more information, but that's what we got. So I just think that we should just say that this is a list that was provided by this Idaho National Lab, and just go with that. You know, I mean, we can't do any better.
Well, but I don't even want to use that list. I mean, that list, I can't even tell what those dams are. I know tons of the dams in this state, and I even asked others at DEP on that list, and so did Alicia, and more than half we couldn't even figure out what dam they're referring to. So I don't think there's any reason to put the 2005 list in. It doesn't seem accurate enough to me.
Yeah.
I will say, I said at the very beginning of this meeting, and I know it's gotten lost in the shuffle and we never would have had time to complete it anyway. But years ago, a hydro company, one of the hydro companies, I forget if it was Gomez and Sullivan or one of them, was one of the engineering companies, was paid to come up with like a figure that gave a lot of the site data on it. It was like a chart. And you could do some quick checks, like based on the flow, the head, the size of the dam, everything else. You do some quick checks if it would even have any level of feasibility. You know, was it worth it even to study it further? And I've always said a chart like that for Connecticut would be wonderful to have. I mean, if we really were talking about some of these non-hydro dams, it'd be wonderful to have something like that helped take off the laughable ones and really just look at others. But otherwise, I'm completely on board with what Len said. I think most of our potential in this state is about increasing hydro potential at ongoing hydroelectric plants that we have in Connecticut.
Maybe the language as it stands, there's no verifiable data is appropriate. I mean, it seems
right.
like, yeah.
Just no data. So we shouldn't even refer to data if it's, I mean, if I had even been able to recognize the names of the dams on that 2005 list, I can understand including it, but otherwise I don't think we should include it at all.
I'm okay with not including the 2005 list. I think that's, it's 20-year-old data.
And so I think that once we really look at the other sections, a lot of this can be reworked, and some of it might not even be necessary to make a statement on. So I think we should revisit this section once, you know, we see what else is in the report, to see if, because it just may not flow right if other sections don't even refer to potential hydropower and unpowered dams.
Yeah.
Exactly.
But again, I'm not going to make the unilateral decision. I'd let Laura and Eric chime in on that.
Yeah, I'd also prefer just not to talk about those dams and talk about the resources we have right now.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So right now we're just going to leave for which there's no current available data. We'll leave it that. And I do agree. I think every section we put out there, no matter what we do, is going to need to be reworked in the context of the larger document. So
yeah.
Okay. So with regard to this next issue here, I wasn't sure what the big change why the big change, but who was it that made this here? John. Laura, looks like you said you want to leave it as it is, and John, you had made a change. So I don't know if you two want to kind of address this.
I was just interjecting the idea of, any project doing a cost benefit analysis. Because, there's always two sides, but, I don't know, Laura I don't think, well, this is the impact section, so maybe we didn't want to talk about, the benefits and I don't know. I mean, that was all. I was just looking for the way anybody, I think, would approach doing it, almost any project, whether it's hydro or putting a patio in your backyard. What's the cost and benefit?
I would be okay with just saying that, it's just got to be part of the cost benefit analysis. I think that simplifies it a little. I'm sorry, Laura, what were you going to say?
I was just gonna say, could we scroll up a little so we can see the whole paragraph and not just the purple part thing?
Am I the only person who's tried to scroll on this document about 5 times during this?
Exactly. I
No.
did. I have at least thought about it for actions. I mean, I didn't feel strongly about this one. I also didn't feel strongly about adding that other thing in. So I don't feel super. All the costs must be weighed. Yeah, I mean, we were making comments on the impacts. This wasn't the benefits section. So, I mean, whatever. That's why I said I didn't feel that was needed, but.
Yeah, I guess I also don't feel strongly about it, but as long as we just are, again, consistent through the document, when we're talking about benefits, do we also talk about it? And yes, there are costs. And when we're talking about, impacts, are we also saying there are benefits? And that's fine. If the effort is to present a holistic, balanced picture, I don't have a problem with the suggested language there.
Right. Then when we're talking about the benefits, we can do the same thing. Right.
Okay. All right. So this next one I think is probably a more substantive conversation, rather than just kind of wordsmithing and nibbling around the edges. Obviously, this section makes a significant statement here. I think that Mariana had a comment here. Looks like with regard to contributions being made towards clean energy goals. John had a comment. Laura pointed out the fact that we needed to discuss, and then I added my point of view too. And so just to kind of start off with the overall gist, my pushback on this particular section, I'll just start off with mine because I was pushing back, is that to limit this stuff towards specifically just environmental improvements. I suppose if those investments are going to that, I guess that's a conversation to be had. But there are other benefits that aren't necessarily included in sustaining specific resources that exist. I mean, a lot of resources are hugely important in other ways to the communities, whether it's recreation, whether it's as a property taxpayer. Sometimes the dams contribute towards other things that are not necessarily valued, such as some flood control or irrigation, other management techniques for other issues as well. So I think limiting it specifically towards environmental improvements and not looking at the larger picture with these particular resources is missing part of the issue. I don't know if that makes any sense to everybody else, but that was my take here. And I think the question I have with the first sentence, dams should be screened for removal potential before being considered for incentives. What does that process look like? For example, I'll bring up our resource in Scotland. If we were to try to apply for, one of these programs that were considerations that we've offered up here, does that have to be screened for removal? If so, what does that process look like? I mean, is that going to take months, years, days, hours? To me, certain resources are pretty obvious. You're not going to get rid of them. Others less so, but it's in order to find some kind of a uniform process to make it usable. I think we'd have to kind of discuss that in more detail.
Well, on the other side of that, Len, you also, if there was a nonprofit organization that, and I'll just use Scotland as the example, had invested money or is holding, or has received a grant, for a study to remove the dam, I think that that's something that needs to be looked into, right? So, because there you have a nonprofit organization that, you know, is now spending money that isn't theirs, for a project that may all of a sudden become completely, unfeasible. I don't know if that made any sense. So essentially the screening being to make sure that no one has put any resources into removing, right? Because it's not just the removal that you have to get the resources for, it's the study for the removal of the dam.
I'll push back on you a little bit on that. Just I understand what you're saying. I do see in certain circumstances, and I'll use our Massachusetts facilities as an example, which are undergoing relicensing right now. If there was an opportunity to stop everything just by simply studying an issue, we would never operate there again. We have certain opposition to those facilities that want to see them gone no matter what, whether it's feasible or not, whether it's in the interest of everybody else in the state or not, it doesn't matter. If that's the threshold, then you basically make it very easy for a resource to be stuck in this purgatory, if you will, simply by some organization deciding they're going to study whether the dam should be removed.
Well, I'm talking about dams that are currently unpowered.
Yeah, and as am I. So, for example, if there was an organization that wanted to see Scotland removed, whether or not others agree, that organization could put some resources to studying the removal and leave it in purgatory forever. And,
Wait.
Well, no, I'm
You
talking
said
about,
unpowered.
so.
unpowered.
I said unpowered, yeah.
Oh, I'm
unpowered.
sorry. I thought you were
Opposite.
So what I'm talking about is a situation where, okay, so if Scotland doesn't have any, I just assume Scotland was unpowered. Well, we'll use another example.
No, it's
No.
powered. It's just put a fish
Yeah,
way.
okay, I didn't realize that. So an unpowered dam where, you've had an organization like Save the Sound that has already received a grant, is in the process of studying an unpowered dam. This is what I'm talking about, not already powered dams. These are unpowered dams that might be sited.
Yeah, and this gets to, again, a cornerstone of why it's important to take that potential list off. That's where we're going to have the bigger issue. Unpowered dams, we're not going to want to make unpowered dams now economically feasible to put hydro on them through a subsidy. That's not going to make sense for us. Whereas we're not going to feel like that about active hydro dams, dams that are active hydro. Although we might add, I've worked on a few hydro dams, and we can go back to the horrible one here, Kinneytown, that just didn't have a lot of economic sense to begin with. And if we had subsidized it and all of a sudden it did, it would have just maintained the pain longer, the impacts that particular dam was having on that system. So
for this section specifically, or this paragraph specifically, would people be open to me just simply adding unpowered before dams here to try to make it clear?
So, well, but I think Alicia had said earlier, if we just take off these potential, totally, we could kind of rework this whole section, right?
I personally would be amenable to eliminating the
potential one.
The unpowered potential, if you will.
Potential.
Like I said, I think you and I both agreed earlier. Potential in my mind also includes, augmenting what's at an existing resource. But if we're clear and we say anything that's not really currently built, this vague possible new facility on an unpowered dam, I don't think necessarily coexists as well with our task force charge which was specifically about existing hydro. So I'm
Existing,
okay with that.
right.
I don't want to speak for everybody.
I agree, Len. I think what we're being asked to do is really to focus on existing sites. How can they be identified, retained, optimized, and if they need to be incentivized within certain criteria that make sense for the group as a whole, right?
Yeah.
So I think we're almost distracting ourselves by talking at all about unpowered facilities. And the reality is I just don't think there's a tremendous path for that, in the market or outside of it at this point. So.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, there are a few powered facilities, I would say. I mean, I surely don't think of something as Scotland as needing to go through some kind of process by which we figure out if there's potential for removal or not. But there are some existing hydros, and I can think of at least one in Connecticut, that, might be pretty marginal and might be in a spot where removal might make sense.
Alicia, you have your hand up.
So I think it would be a good idea, wherever we're talking about the scope of what we looked at, maybe just making a statement similar to what Steve just made on, that we had talked about unpowered dams and decided not to make that part of our scope for X, Y, and Z reasons. I think that would be helpful.
And then we could, Eric and Alicia and I could relook at this section and take out those kind of things. Anything that we felt was related to that.
That would probably eliminate a bunch of the different.
I think it would. I think it would.
We've
Yeah,
heard.
no, I think it would. I think it would.
Okay. Does anybody have any objections to that? It looks like Duncan, you got your hand up. Go ahead.
Right. Well, with the policy considerations that we're going to be putting forward, some of that does include providing certain rates in class 1 or whatever for unpowered dams. Are you folks considering totally not providing anything for any unpowered dam in Connecticut? Or are you just working on some wording on this thing?
Why would an unpowered dam have a rate?
Why would it have a rate? What do you mean?
Well, did you just say that you were considering policies to set rates for unpowered dams? Why would you be setting rates for an unpowered dam? It doesn't have power.
So that a developer can come in
So
and
that you can
develop that site and put it online and make renewable energy.
Right. So that's what we're talking about. That's either, if we include that, then we're trying to put some comments in relating to that. But if these guys want these kind of comments not in the document, though, that's where we'll have issues, is with that kind of situation where a developer comes into an unpowered dam.
Right.
And
You don't like that, is what you're saying. You don't like
we don't like
developing.
subsidies. Well, that's what this comment here is, that we wouldn't want subsidies. We wouldn't want, artificially raised rates on a dam that's currently not a power dam, that now all of a sudden becomes a potential for a power dam because you've just subsidized it.
Yeah. Well, I would add, why not? I would say this is renewable energy. It has a lot of benefits. I would say we're giving a lot of incentives for wind and solar. Are you against that also? I would say you need to look at every project individually to see its overall impacts. I would say that it could be a benefit to the environment. I would say that we need to look at every one of them and not just say that we can't give any incentive to any unpowered dam. I think that is far-fetched.
Right, but Duncan, this is clearly where there's two sides of this particular fence. That's clearly the difference. But that is the area we have problems with, is subsidizing a dam that right now would make no sense to put hydro on it. And all of a sudden it's a hydro dam because we subsidized it, because we said it's going to get a higher rate.
All right. Well, you added words there saying if it makes no sense.
Makes no sense economically. Economically, makes currently no sense economically right now. But we subsidize it. We recommend subsidizing it. And then it does make economic sense to put hydro on that unpowered dam.
John, why don't you hop in? I see you raise your hand here.
Yeah, I'll
Yes,
sit down.
I think, what we're talking about generally is like sort of acknowledging that there are two sides to dams and hydro in general, right? There's some benefits, there are drawbacks. But the thing that we have been trying to coalesce around are like, what are the appropriate guardrails? What is the hydro that that the industry and the environmental groups are okay with, right? And whether the dam or the project is existing and has been for decades, or is a project that could be developed, so long as it meets those criteria, I'm not sure I understand the difference between, it's sort of like just if a project could be developed appropriately, and we have programs that maybe arise from this task force work that allow the development of those resources. I think what Duncan's trying to understand is, why wouldn't we do that? Why would we leave that on the table if it can be done to everyone's standards and leave them out of this?
This gets back to our earlier conversation. We were talking about not putting the potential, the proposed future, potential dams that are not hydro right now. We were talking about taking that off the table. If we're not talking about taking those off the table, then we're going to continue to request guardrails, because we don't want to subsidize dams that are currently not hydro right now and all of a sudden make them economically feasible only through subsidy.
I might jump in just to add something here. I will say, with regard to the quote unquote potential, if a potential hydro facility has the ability to be developed in the state of Connecticut, there are other things that they can try to qualify for that would potentially get it over the hump, if you will, if they're viable. And obviously it hasn't happened yet. I haven't seen, when was the last time there was a hydro developed in the state of Connecticut? It's been years. But with the exception, I think, the Archimedes screw that was put in Milltown or something like that. But beyond that, I mean, it's not happening without that. And these resources could qualify for, for example, main class ones or something like that. And they still haven't done it yet. So in my mind, to me, from a task force perspective, our charge was existing resources. I'm good with sticking to that, which I think would make things a little bit more doable from a task force report perspective. But if we do want to add in the potential, I think that it's gonna make for a tougher report. But if that's what the group wants to do, I mean, it's obviously we're kind of an impasse with regard to potential versus limiting it.
Yeah, Len, I'm with you as well. And in fact, I think in the Connecticut RPS, a new project could avail itself of that opportunity, provided it hasn't been considered, the dam hasn't been considered for removal. So that's already sort of a guardrail within the RPS, but a new project, 30 megawatts or 60 megawatts or less can currently qualify. So I think we go down a path that becomes distracting and takes us away from things that we can actually sort of agree on, with limited real upside from a practical standpoint. That's just my perspective.
I don't feel strongly about it. I think you're right, Steve. I think we have a lot more to get through here, and this is not something I think probably is deserving of too much more conversation. We should take the easy road here.
Go ahead, Alicia.
As far as the renewable portfolio standards go, Steve's right. The reason for the RPS is to encourage new renewable technology. And actually, I had a little bit of an epiphany. I feel stupid for not catching it before, but that is the reason for the dates in the RPS, because the RPS is meant to reward new and upcoming technology, and just sort of, and not the legacy technology. So that was the reason why the dates are the way they are within the RPS standards. And just to Steve's point, and the point, Len, you made, that, with any technology that may come down the pike with hydropower, it allows for that to be incentivized as a clean energy and a newer technology. And that's what the RPS is about.
Okay. So I'll just put it out there. Duncan, are you okay with us moving forward with limiting ourselves to existing resources?
You're saying right across the board, even with our policy considerations, you are talking about not providing anything for unpowered dams? Is that what you're talking about?
No, I think in terms of discussing this entire thing here, the policy
Yeah.
considerations, you know, I don't think anything that we put forth would necessarily include. It may not preclude new resources either, but to what Steve and I were discussing earlier, if you're an undeveloped dam and you want to put a hydro on that facility and it crosses all the T's and dots all the I's and does everything it needs to do right there off the bat, it already qualifies as a class one run of river resource if you can cross all those thresholds. So there's already a path in my mind for unpowered dams if they're viable to becoming a viable resource. It's just we haven't had them, and from my perspective, we're we're not precluding anybody from taking advantage. I think we're specifically honing in on the charge, which was existing resources.
Okay, well, I'm okay with doing whatever wording you want to do here on that, but I just don't want it to affect the direction that we're going in with our 4 policy considerations that we're drafting, right?
Well, are the 4 policy considerations then talking about subsidies for unpowered dams?
When you talk about subsidies, I really want to know what you're talking about, but we are talking about giving class 1, 2 projects that were put online in a certain date that is not included now. We're talking about a tariff, we're talking about a solicitation, and we're talking about the other one.
NRES,
Yeah,
the NRES amendments.
I mean, we can all have our opinions about what we like and don't like. That's fine. That's good. But I think that, you know, you got to admit that there's an unpowered dam out there that if we put it back online, it provides much more benefits than detriments.
Yeah,
You cannot.
that's not what I agree with, Duncan. That's not true. I don't agree with that.
So you're telling me that if you take an existing dam that doesn't have hydro on it and you get the hydro running and you comply with all the guardrails, and you're generating renewable power, you're providing safety and all these other benefits of hydro, then you're still saying you don't like it?
Yes, that is what I'm
Why?
saying. I don't want to
Why?
subsidize dams to develop dams that are currently not cost effective right now and turn them into being cost effective by giving them more money, having the taxpayers give them more money. And that's what this exact sentence, the whole sentence says right now. So that's why I said we would need to discuss this, because I think this is kind of the cornerstone of the issue here. I don't believe by turning it hydro, it makes it better. I don't. I believe by removing it, it makes the river better. And that's much less likely to happen if you're going to take old dams and turn them into small hydros. So I mean, it just gets back at the point at the beginning. I thought we were talking about existing here and not potential. But if we are talking about potential too, then this is the concern here. I didn't write this, by the way. This is not my wording here that I'm defending.
So my wording, so I'll go forth and defend it. But one thing I do have to say is the current RPS, as we already discussed, already does allow for a new project, and is actually targeted toward projects. But I would say that what we're trying to get at here is making sure that all of the externalities are considered in a new project when determining whether it's viable or not, right? So you're looking at decommissioning, you're looking at, cost of repairs, and is that that's an important part of the process when looking at whether, a project is worthy of any sort of incentive. And I feel that I think the best proposal we have going forward for that is the DEP procurement, because that review happens within the procurement process and within the selection of the projects through that procurement. So I guess I know we can go back and forth about this all day, and I'm sorry this turned into such a time suck, but I think it is important to continue to point out that, there are a lot of factors that have to be considered on both sides, right? The balance between the benefits and the costs, but all of the externalities need to be considered within that cost. Otherwise, we may end up with a whole bunch of dams later on that, we need to do something about because they ended up with hydropower on that wasn't particularly appropriate, and through incentives that weren't where the projects weren't vetted well enough. So I think that's what I was trying to get at in these paragraphs, and might have done it poorly.
Yeah, Doug, and I think, given the different interests around the table, the fact that we can get to a place of sort of highlighting potential policy recommendations that do allow for support for existing resources, that do allow for resources like yours to potentially have, an economic path to continued operation, like that is a good outcome in and of itself. And I think, in the context of these efforts, we don't want to let perfect be the enemy of good. I think we're probably all going to be best served by sort of addressing what we don't agree on and kind of moving beyond it from there. That's my perspective, at least.
So
What are we going to do with this wording here that begins with the word dam should be screened and ends with the word subsidization? I mean, I don't agree with that wordage.
Well, as you can see on my comments on your documents, I don't agree with all of yours either. So there's definitely a discussion on these and difficult to get to the exact right spot. When Len was saying that we were going to focus on existing resources and not potential, I was comfortable with reworking these sections. But if that's not the case, I know that Save the Sound, for one, is not going to want to recommend or be part of something that says, hey, those little dams that are rotting in place and no one's taking care of, now you can get this tons more money if you put hydro on them, a much higher rate right now. So let's all develop those into hydro. That's not going to be something we would be supportive of. That's exactly why we're on the task force, to avoid that. I said at the beginning, I'll say it again. I think that if we look through the recordings, I probably said it about 4 times right now. Large scale hydro has a lot of benefits, and we understand the impacts of it, and it's in very specific locations. Small scale hydro spread out on tons of little tiny dams across our state fragments our systems considerably more, and with a lot less economic benefit. We understand the renewable power issues. We understand the economic benefits. But when a dam is not a cost-effective option right now, but then becomes a cost-effective option because we have decided to subsidize its rates, we are spreading out these kind of impacts on a lot of little dinky dams across the state. And that's what we're uncomfortable with. And that's what we're trying to safeguard.
May I recommend that we just flag this to rework in the context of the larger document so that we can
move on?
I think that's a wise option there, Alicia. And I do think that it's not going to be the first time or the last time we're gonna probably bump up against this issue to a degree. But why don't I just simply put in a note here, just a comment to rework. If I can get the stupid thing in here. Here we go. Everybody, I think, is understanding of what we just discussed. So, with that,
Excuse me, it's gonna be papers attached, and Save the Sound and Rivers Alliance can voice their, and are going to, and voice their opinions in those attached papers to the appendix. So that maybe is a bit of a understanding there that, we have our own views on things and they can be shown there, but to put a view here in the body of our report, I would just like us to be a kind of an overall opinion on things, not too specific on our views, maybe.
I think, Duncan, one of the things that we need to find as a group is some kind of a path forward that I don't even want to say majority. I think it comes down to, if we want everybody on the task force to sign on to, we have to agree on the language we're going to include in the report. So even if you really want something, if Laura doesn't think that this is the right path forward, she's not going to sign on to it. It's not going to be a report from the task force. It's literally just going to be a group of people who put together testimony, for lack of a better way to put it. For this task force to work, we're going to have to find some level of compromise. And I think, from my perspective, I understand what Laura's saying. I understand what you're saying. To me, there is a path forward with regard to, there's two paths forward, really. We can keep the language that Laura and Alicia and Eric have included in this particular document and maintain that language, including resources that are unpowered, or we can remove the unpowered resources from this consideration and rework that language to probably eliminate what you just voiced a concern with. Either way, I mean, those are our two options. I guess there may be a third option, which essentially what I don't want to see happen is this whole thing falls apart and we don't get a report out. And that's possible too. I'd rather not see that happen, but that would not be unprecedented in the history of task forces in Connecticut. So,
and I want to point out, when we talk about majority and not, and I know you said that and then took it back, we don't have an equal representation on this task force. I want to make that clear. We don't. Alicia's not formally on. I'm the only one from an environmental NGO on this call. Eric's organization supports both, is both energy and environment. So I just want to keep that really clear.
In my mind, the task force, for this to work, everybody needs to be able to sign on as much as possible. I understand Pura has their own issues. Deep and the Green Bank have to bring it back to their people to be approved. But at the same time, in my mind, we're all working towards some language that works. And if it doesn't work for everybody, then it works for nobody, in my mind.
Agreed.
Trying to move forward here just to get through this particular document. I know we haven't touched the other piece of it yet either. Where are we? It looks like, who asked? Okay, it looks like, John, you added some stuff here in the in subsection C. A bunch of different language here, and I don't see any comments or anything associated with this. Are there concerns about this language here?
That's just from the FERC exemption requirements. It just meant to clarify.
Okay.
Yeah, I didn't.
Yeah, I actually appreciate the clarification.
Yeah,
I have to admit that trying to work through all of those definitions and try to make sense of them was not fun. So thank you for the clarifications.
It's a whole thing all by itself this year. Even working in the industry, it's still got to go back and check all the fine print because there's a lot of it.
Okay. The next comment has to do with Kinneytown here. I'm okay with this remaining, but I know, John, you wrote something here. I don't know if you want to discuss it.
What did I write?
Talking about Kinneytown, the FERC exemption for the project.
Yeah, I think it's more of just kind of a note to the draft. I don't believe I'm really looking for any changes in the language, but just in terms of context, I think in other parts of this, we talk about, an exemption doesn't really have any regulatory oversight. And I think what I'm trying to point out here is in order to get the exemption, a developer or owner would have to have gone through kind of the licensing process once, which including NEPA and a 401 and all the things that a typical license project would need to. And then it doesn't provide kind of cover forever, right? FERC exemptions include standard or mandatory terms and conditions which allow reopening to address things like requirements for fish passage, which is exactly what happened at Kinneytown. That was an exemption that was reopened. They installed fish passage and then they ran it into the ground. There's a lot more story there. It wasn't executed well or operator maintained appropriately. So and ultimately it is where it is for those reasons. But I think that was the point. It's just kind of providing a little bit more context and like what an exemption actually is and what it isn't. But I don't think we need to, I'm not looking for changes to text. I
was going to say, I don't know if we need to go into the detail. I mean, Kinneytown is an example of what not to do. I mean, that's pretty much what it comes down to.
Clearly.
Exactly. Yeah.
And unfortunately, we learn from those. We learn from the really bad examples.
Yes. Yeah.
The point here is just to show how difficult it can be when there is a project that is a good example of what not to do, how difficult it can be to fix that problem.
Sure.
Extremely
and usually
difficult.
it's nonprofits that have to step into that and try to get someone to pay attention. Unfortunately, Save the Sound has a lot of lawyers.
We do, but it took 2 years, an enormous amount of our funding and resources to bring attention to that. Not just ours, NVCOGS as well, and our other partners. So it surely was extremely difficult because of the exempt status. If that had not been an exempt dam, we would have had a much better chance pointing out the numerous deficiencies to FERC.
I'm just hearing sort of like maybe one of the underlying issues here is just resource availability, right?
It is.
And I know one of we have been focusing, and this is like a little. Some of my industry peers are probably going to want to take me out back after this, but
back to the woodshed.
Yeah,
what is it back behind the woodshed?
Well, because we're a really heavily regulated industry as it is.
Yeah.
But what you're saying is, there are existing we're not going to change federal statute. We're not going to change those mechanisms in a Connecticut task force, right? I mean, that's just the reality. So we kind of have to use what's available. But if navigating that process is resource intensive and there are already bandwidth constraints there, we have been focusing on policies that would kind of recognize hydropower that kind of meets the condition, the criteria, or could meet the criteria, with appropriate commercial valuation. But maybe there should be some mention in here about making sure DEP has appropriate resources to conduct reviews, or something along those lines, so that there's that additional element to like a check, right, on what we're talking about doing, and a way to actually do that.
And part of that, John, and I know it is not going to be something that probably this entire group agrees on, but the very last sentence of this document relates to that as well. Part of what some of the environmental community would like to see is that when studies are done on hydro facilities and relicensings of hydro facilities, we would like the studies to be done by a neutral party, more or less not one hired by the industry, but one hired by either FERC or by DEP, instead of by the industry itself. I think then NGOs wouldn't feel the need as much to try to identify, find, and use a lot of their own resources, because they would feel like there was less potential for, and I'll say potential for bias, if these were being directed by an agency, if these studies and evaluations were being directed by an agency as opposed to done by the industry themselves, and then, needing review and attention by both the agencies and the NGOs and the tribes to ensure we get that balance that the federal law lays out.
Yeah, I guess everybody approaches it differently. Like for our projects, when we go through relicensing, we try to be very collaborative, and the study plans that are developed to support those processes are developed like collaboratively and approved by agencies before they're implemented, and then they're reviewed and discussed and revised based on those consultations, which again is all statutory. I'm not sure that getting the sign off by agencies is statutory, but it just makes sense to us that we're all on the same page with what that the data is collected appropriately and analyzed.
Yeah, but when you say they're done collaboratively, who is paying the consultant to do the analysis?
Oh, well, the owner is.
Right, exactly.
Those are very expensive, Lori.
Right, they are very expensive.
Yeah.
And it's hired by the owner to do
Right.
that. It's reviewed by the owner as part of that process. It's not hired by the NGOs to do that. It's not hired by the state to do that. It is hired by the industry themselves.
The studies are requested by stakeholders.
Yeah,
right?
That's true.
The methodology is approved collaboratively, right?
Yep.
The studies are conducted, just say conducted, which means, either an owner will do it themselves, depending on how complex it is, or they'll hire somebody to do it.
Yep.
And then those results are kind of reviewed by the agencies, and then again by FERC and the public as part of the
yeah. And I have reviewed a lot of those studies, and what I'm saying is I think the issue is that again the groups that are doing this, the consulting firms that are doing this, are hired by the hydro industry themselves, as opposed to, let's say, putting that money into reserve at FERC or DEP and them hiring a consultant to do the work. I'm just saying I've seen that type of bias in reports. There's no question that I've seen that type of bias, and I think people would be more comfortable with that there wasn't bias if that wasn't the case. If that the consulting firms that are doing this work were hired by agencies instead. Still the funding would come from the owner, but the agencies would hire the consultants to do the work.
I think I understand what you're saying, but I'm wondering if that doesn't kind of get into a fairly wholesale change to the Federal Power Act and how that's done.
Yeah, no, I might not. I definitely think it might not be something we can take care of on a Connecticut basis.
Right.
I think it is a national basis, but whatever. I mean, you had brought it up right there on talking about that, but that is it. I mean, it is resource intensive, and these reviews are almost impossible for NGOs to be able to afford. We have no revenue stream ourselves relating to that hydro facility. We have no revenue stream. So any of the review work by us or by the tribes is from our own funding.
I don't want to interject and stop the conversation, but I do think, I mean, this may be a federal issue that we have no authority over, and I know we only have a little bit of time left. I want to make sure we finish this document if we can before the end of the meeting. And I do see a couple hands up. Alicia has her hand up first.
Yeah, I just wanted to, so the reason why I included this section is because my experience interacting with the Energy and Technology Committee is that there is an assumption by some of the legislators, and I think this also goes beyond that, to folks who don't understand the processes and how hydropower is regulated, that there are already external things in place to always ensure that there is that there are the environmental mitigation measures. And I thought it was important to include this just to say, this isn't always the case. There are, plenty of projects that are not run of river. And so it's important. I felt it was important to give the environmental perspective from that side, and so that the reader does understand that, we need to make sure in every place we can that we are stressing that these environmental mitigation measures are in place, to ensure that this is more consistent across the board in hydropower.
I'm okay with leaving this in here. I think it provides context that, to your point, would be useful to legislators to understand. I think, I mean, at the end of the day, there are bad examples of things that shouldn't happen, and there are certainly some nuances and whatnot that I think need to be understood. But I'm okay with leaving it in there.
And unfortunately, we don't always interact with you good guys because we don't have reason to.
Everybody has issues sometimes. It's going to happen, but
And
So
it is interesting to see that the ones that we have the most difficulty with, none of those are represented on this task force. None of the groups that we have had these issues with are represented. Not that they should be represented here, but I'm just saying it's interesting that they are not.
We'll take that as a compliment.
Yes, right. You should.
I think moving forward, there's a few more comments here. This one in particular on, let's see, minimizing the downstream flow fluctuations. I mean, this is almost getting into the weeds here. I don't know if we need to go through in detail some of the back and forth here, but
No, I'll just again, that's more of a note to draft. Like, I'm not looking for changes. I think, Laura and I are on the same page. It was just a kind of an editorial.
Okay. I will say you did catch me on a grumpy day when I was answering any of those comments. I do specifically remember being grumpy that day.
It's okay. We all have those days.
This is a question. This is a number. Maybe we just want to double check. I think I had the same question. 58% of the hydropower projects are run of river. What's that based on?
It's per project. So it's the information that in the Oak Ridge Laboratories list for specific projects. So it's per project.
Okay.
We can probably make sure that's specified. I think it's specified up top well, but not here.
Yeah, as I say, it may be somewhere. I just put a little notation to make sure we cite it and get it right.
But also note that it's per project, and we should probably say that again. So cite this number, but underneath also say that it is per project.
Okay. And then when it comes down to this question here, a large percentage of projects have no information on mode of operation. Is that referring to?
Well, the Oak Ridge study the study that I referred to did not have operational mode. I'm not sure what their sources were. I'm assuming it was the FERC. I'll have to go back to the study. I know they do cite their sources. So I just have to go back and look at that study to see what documents they had sourced together.
Are you referring to things like 24-hour peaking versus other operations, or are you specifically referring to whether it's run of river or conventional or whatnot?
I'd have to bring up the spreadsheet. And again, I tried to scroll down on the document on the screen.
The only reason why I ask is, what type of a project it is, whether it's a run of river or whatnot. I think that's a lot of that is publicly available. You're probably not going to find out whether or not a resource, is a 24-hour peaker or something like that. I mean,
that is very difficult to figure out. Yeah.
And that probably won't be available. I think a lot of that is kind of kept between the resource and the ISO, depending on the markets and how things are operating. I mean, certain resources can operate differently than in one set of circumstances than they would in other set of circumstances.
I think the 3 operational modes that were in the spreadsheet were run of river, peaking, and unknown. Those were the three things in the spreadsheet.
Maybe we just have to rework this language because it just
maybe we just refer to the citation again. A large percentage of the projects listed in the blah 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 citation have no information on mode of operation.
Yeah. All right.
But as someone who has tried to look up mode of operation on certain things, it's not an easy thing always to find, even if it might be buried somewhere in the FERC data. Sometimes it's not, and surely not when it comes to something like 24-hour peaking versus, other peaking.
Okay. So this language here, who added this? This was
me.
Okay.
And I borrowed a lot of this from American Whitewater, which kind of has a whole bunch of stuff on FERC process, how to get involved, and things they look for. So really, this is pretty close to the way the FERC rules are written. It's just in English instead of statute form. And it's basically just saying that, equal consideration is given to, power and non-power kind of issues as part of a licensing process or a relicensing process.
Should we add just to address Laura's comment here, is there something we can add to point out that there are some challenges in terms of?
Well, and here's my thing. This is, again, Alicia already told you why she wrote up this section.
Yeah.
A lot of the legislators do believe this. You're right. That is what the law says, that they should be balanced and whatnot. And yet we're continually battling things that have not balanced it properly on projects. And so that is a true problem of ours. And we're trying to point that out, that yes, we don't want them to think falsely that just because it's in the law and part of it, that it means that if it's regulated by the state or FERC, it is being balanced. It's not true. I mean, we've got these examples. We call them bad players on this call, but they do exist. So while we're trying to make a point of that these guardrails of what it says in the law are not quite enough. So for you to restate them there, I understand why you do it, and you're right. You're taking it straight out of what is supposed to be done, but it is not necessarily what is being done.
Yeah, I'm just trying to think of can you scroll back up a second, Len? Sorry. Of course, it's going to hit right on a page break. So if we just kind of consider this text without my addition, Yeah, I mean, look, your statement is accurate, you know. It
You know,
everything, everything that is asked for isn't automatically incorporated.
isn't automatically. Maybe we could find a middle ground here. If we started that sentence where it says effective environmental mitigations are not automatically, we could start like while while the federal law states that we should have equal consideration and is mandated by effective environmental mitigations are not automatically incorporated into FERC licensing and relicensing process. They're not necessarily, because we have examples to show that that is not always the case.
I think, yeah, I mean, we can resequence that. I think maybe where, like the key word for me might be effective, right? Environmental mitigation measures, not automatically incorporated, whether it's effective or it's requested. I think that's where this concept of equal consideration comes into play, is like, back to that, the kind of the cost benefit, like, is this a technology that we feel will provide environmental benefits that are being sought? Will it address the issue that is the subject of mitigation? To the effectiveness of it, like fish passage, we'll keep beating on Kitty Town.
Yeah, it's an easy target.
Right? So like, okay, where, fish passage was required. It was installed. It wasn't effective.
And they didn't operate it in a way to keep it effective.
And maybe that's part of it. Like, look, there's a lot of nuance there that I certainly don't have, all visibility into. But, the mitigation measure was required and installed. Its effectiveness is almost a separate issue.
Yeah, and I would add too, I mean, effective is highly subjective. I mean,
right.
If you come into a settlement and you get a license and you have specific things you have to implement, there are going to be things that some organizations are not in agreement with and don't think are good enough. Whether it's effective or not, that's to John's point, that's something that needs to be measured, in other ways down the road. But what is effective at the outset, from certain organizations' perspectives is not always included in this.
I'm perfectly fine with just saying environmental mitigation measures, just starting it out that way. I'm fine with it. Laura, are you okay with it?
Well, I don't think they're anti the word effective. I think that the word effective is helping, because the environmental mitigation measures might be there, but are they effective? So I don't think, am I wrong, John? You're not asking to take out the word effective. The effective is helping, right?
I think there's the way the sentence reads now is that you're saying they're not automatically incorporated into the FERC license or licensing process, right? So I think they're separate.
Yeah, I see
what Alicia's saying is, the measures are incorporated, right? And then typically, particularly with newer licenses, effectiveness is also incorporated into the license. That's not true for older licenses or exemptions. We are getting smarter, right? The science base, the knowledge science base is getting more mature. So we're understanding that just installing a fish ladder doesn't necessarily mean fish are going to use it, as an example, right? So there's not only do you have to install it, but then you have to go and test the effectiveness. And like, Tim and I talk about this a lot. So like, how are we going to make sure this thing is working, right? And then there's years of studies that measure that are designed to measure effectiveness, and where appropriate, make modifications so that you're getting the type of performance that is intended through the initial mandate to install the mitigation measure or to complete whatever the mitigation exercise is.
So again, can't we start the sentence with something to the effect that while federal regulation requires equal consideration of both power generation and environmental issues, effective environmental mitigation measures are not automatically incorporated into license and is that still not doing it then? Because you're worried that
How about this? Can we just sidebar this one? Because I feel like we're very close.
Yeah, I think we're very close. I think we're close on this one too. I think we're close on this one too. I will say in the comments.
Let
you see
let
that-
me just ask one question really quick. Is every project that FERC licenses, does FERC make them run a river? Force them to be run a river? Is that automatic?
No, there's lots
So
of them.
that's kind of my point in trying to get this across, that what we're saying are the absolute, are the things that make hydropower not only clean but green, are not automatically part of the FERC license, right? Run a river is not automatic.
Right.
And fish passage on some is not automatic either, as we know.
Should we,
Often it's put in by trigger points. It's not automatically included. It might say at a later date if triggered, but it's not automatically included. Fish passage is not on every single one. Run of river is not on every single one.
should we sidebar it to your point?
I still think sidebarring it and discussing it in a little more detail would be good, but without necessarily having the whole lot. I just wanted to point out, in my comment, I also mentioned Rainbow because Rainbow is not a FERC licensed dam and it's a hydro dam, and we haven't gotten into a lot of that, but that is a non-FERC licensed hydro dam that has significant fish passage issues, as I'm sure most of you know.
Right. I think Connecticut is an interesting, case study for the non-jurisdictional projects with respect to a lot of the items that we're talking about here.
Yeah.
I will, so there were no other comments or changes made to the rest of the document here. It's except maybe the word relicensing.
Yeah, you didn't make any comments, but okay, good. But that last sentence is the one I thought you guys were gonna jump down my throat about. Yeah, maybe you just didn't read it. John, maybe you just got tired. Maybe you got tired and didn't read that last sentence.
I think my perspective on the last sentence is it's true. There's definitely a lot more. There's a back and forth to be had on that as well. I mean, I can say that I have had experiences with certain regulators who I would not consider to be unbiased. Not necessarily in Connecticut. I'm talking elsewhere. But
No, and I wasn't saying the
there's-
regulators should do the studies. I like consultants doing the studies. I think it's a good idea to have it's more like who's paying them.
Well, yeah, and I get it. I get it. So that's a bigger issue, but frankly, that's a FERC issue. It's not something we can address here.
Yeah.
So I'm not.
Laura, if you want to pay our consultants fees for licensing.
No, it's not as much that. It's not as much that. I want them to be paid by, the economic asset, the dam owner's economic asset. I want it to be paid, but then I want it to go through a third party of an organization like a state or FERC.
Essentially the
that is
management.
hired by those groups. I mean, I was a consultant for a long time, so I understand the bias is meant or not even not meant by trying to keep a client a return customer. So
I mean, and I think to Len's point, the problem of bias is inherent throughout all aspects of society, whether we're talking about hydro licensing or whatever.
True, but this is a pretty obvious one that I run into on a regular basis, and then continually looking for funding to try to be the one to comment.
Yeah, I mean, industry could say the same thing. There are regulators, to Len's point, where you cannot have really productive conversations because the mindset is that there should be no dams anywhere and all hydro is bad.
That would be bad. Yeah.
And as an owner, I sure don't want those people, directing consultants' studies.
Yeah. Well, I want to keep in mind that I personally do not feel that way, and a lot of people involved in restoring rivers do not feel that way.
I feel like the conversation is coming around. Some of that mindset, I think, is a little dated as people get to realize we have, a lot of issues, that are existential crisis, relative to climate change, and that hydro can be done well, right? And it can be part of the solution, but also recognizing that sometimes those projects need to make changes too. And that's what this discussion's about, right? I think it's healthy. I'm glad it's happening in Connecticut.
So I know we didn't get through the second part, the second section of the study, but obviously there's some things in here to rework. One thing I do want to do this coming week is try to put together a larger draft that really encompasses everything that we have, so that we have almost like a master document. We may want to rework this a bit before we do that, and obviously we haven't gotten to the industry subcommittee sections yet. So I would propose that next week, that's probably what we'll spend most of our time on. And in addition to that, ideally, maybe Deep and Pura and the Green Bank might have some feedback with regard to the considerations that we had put out last week. And I've already kept you guys over time, so I don't want to keep you too much longer, but I do want to call for, public comment at all. Hearing none, with that, I would propose the meeting next week on Friday at 1 o'clock. I would offer maybe we should allot maybe 2 hours if we can. I don't want to grab everybody's entire Friday, but there's a lot of stuff to go through still.
And Len and John, you're going to be on the call though, right? You just can't lead it because you're going to be like on a train drinking beer. Was that it? Is that what I heard?
If I'm on a call, I won't be drinking beer. Maybe
I'm teasing you. I'm teasing you about the beer part, but was that it? Where you're going to be on? You just can't lead it because you'll be on a train.
For me, it'll be I'll be in the train station, which will be super loud, and then
Okay.
coming from DC, so then I'll be on the train.
Yeah.
My plan is to log in and hopefully contribute to a degree, but I don't know how effective I'll be.
Okay, because that's my comment, because if you and John both are not going to be on the call, even though I very much appreciate, Duncan, that you're stepping up, I'm just wondering if we should be looking at our calendars to shift the day.
Yeah, I'm a big maybe, mostly leaning toward a no.
Exactly, that's what I'm worried about.
Yeah. Go ahead, Duncan.
Yeah, next week in general is no good for me.
Yeah.
Right. Well, we've all been putting a lot of work into this study. It is our charge to get this thing done. I'm a little bit concerned about how much time we spend, like today, talking about some of these things, which maybe I'm just wondering if we can get a little bit more streamlined and look at our purpose here, look at what we're trying to do, and just to try to get to it a bit quicker if possible. I mean, we have several documents that we need to all look at, and I'm wondering if we can all look at these documents and provide comments before the next meeting on next Friday. That we just did the drawbacks today, okay, but we have, in the SharePoint, we have the policy considerations that are 4 documents: the tariff, the solicitation, the class 1, and the NRES. So let's all please look at those and provide comment before the next meeting, please. And also the industry has the existing climate and benefits and challenges section that we have drafted that's also available there. What you do is you go to document, you click documents, and you click report sections, and you click on the document there. So you'll be able to find them. If you have any questions, let me know. But I really, please, I'd like us to try to stick to the program the best we can and move along. I mean, we can talk about pluses and minuses of hydro all day, all week, all year, but what's our purpose here? We're really looking at what is the situation of here it is. Study the existing hydro assets in the state and review the benefits of such assets. So really, we want to see what is out there for hydro. Does it need something? Does it deserve something? I think the answer is yes for some of these projects to get the benefits from them, but have the guardrails in place. And if we can just go forward and get these documents in the shape that we want them to be, then I'd like us to please do that so we can get our document together so that the legislation can look at that before they get to their deadline of JFing the legislation. Thank you.
Yeah, and I agree with all that, Duncan. I just want to suggest, though, that as we get closer to the finish line here, I'd say it's extra important for everyone to be on the line as we have these conversations. And I'm hearing that next Friday might be bad for at least a couple members of the task force. So and Laura made the suggestion, I'm thinking about that our last week, if we want to stick to the March 22nd deadline, if we wanted to try to maybe meet on Monday of that week, like the 18th, as well as on the 22nd, that final day, or just because it looks like the 15th is going to be problematic. And there's a lot that we can do. I mean, thanks to SharePoint, online with drafts, I think we should add to our to-do list, at least to have a draft executive summary, because I think that'll be, really important for folks to feel like they're bought into the entire effort. And so just putting out there that, let's leave maybe the 15th on the calendar, but see if we might be able to find an alternate date, maybe the following week that could work for the energy and technology staff and for, critical mass of all of us to be attending.
So next Friday's meeting, is there any way we can just switch it to the following Monday, March 11th, so that we do actually have something close to a week from now? I can do it anytime after 2 p.m. on the 11th.
I'd rather make it earlier rather than later. We have a job to do, and I'd rather do it sooner than later rather than delaying it. I'd rather do it.
I could do it from you mean earlier than the 11th? Oh, I see what you're saying.
Well, I don't think we're getting earlier.
But John said all next week. Yeah, John said all next week is bad for him.
Yeah, I'm sorry,
Well,
Duncan. I mean, you don't have to hold up for me, but I mean, I might not just be as active,
I could potentially be available on Monday after 2.
It's not the 11th.
On the 11th. Are you talking?
Oh, I didn't mean to say the 11th. Sorry. It's because that they haven't put these in for every Friday. Our next one is the 15th, right? So I meant the 18th.
The 18th. Same thing. I could be available after 2.
On the 18th.
Ideally, yes. I'm traveling that week as well. Part of the week.
Well, in the interest of getting things done earlier rather than later, how does everybody look for the 12th or 13th or 14th?
Well, again, I know that doesn't work for John because he said he can't do next week, but what about you, Len? Or Alicia or any of the other people on the call?
I could do anything on the 12th. The 13th would be out. And then the 14th I could do in the morning. Put it that way.
I can do after 10 a.m. in the morning on the 14th, between 10 and 12 on the 14th.
Should we take this offline and do a quick a doodle poll or something like that, just to see what people's available?
That'd be good.
Okay, why don't we do that then?
Although I, for one, am getting pretty bloody sick of filling out doodle polls. And, just give people like 2-3 options. Don't give them 20. You know how long it takes to fill out a doodle poll when you give us 20 options?
So energy, just to let you know, Energy and Technology has a public hearing on March 14th. So that is out.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah,
That's true, Alicia.
We lost her. Okay, so the 14th is not going to work. Yeah, so do the doodle poll, and this will come up in the doodle poll.
Okay.
But it sounds like don't put the 14th down as a date.
Okay. We'll try to get an additional meeting in there to everyone's point. Like I said, I am going to try to be on the call. I will try to be able to contribute as much as possible. I certainly can't lead it simply because Amtrak isn't that good. No offense to Amtrak. So,
This is being publicly recorded. Len, just for the record, said that.
All right. Well, then, everyone, I appreciate you taking the extra time. I know we lost a couple of people, but we'll get an additional meeting in, and to Duncan's point, try to get into those documents and start doctoring them and whatnot, and we'll go from there.
Great.
Sounds
Thanks,
good.
everyone.
Thanks so much.
Thanks, everybody.